So normally when I come to Antarctica, it's a fairly long old day. It's 3 days of planes from the UK down through South America, down to Punta Arenas, and then flying across on the Dash 7. This year, it was an even longer affair. We took 2 months on the JCR, the James Clark Ross Bass's ship, to sail down through the Atlantic and finally get here. We got here just before Christmas, around about the 23rd of December.
And which was really cool was then stopping at all the stations. So we got to see King Edward Point, we got to see Signy, we got to visit Bird Island. We did the grand tour.
And these are research stations that only a handful of people ever get to visit. So I must be the most fortunate person in the world to get to see all these places.
Oh, my first thoughts were land. I just wanted to be off that ship. I hated it. It was fun to begin with. I didn't get seasick or anything, but being confined to like 30 square meters is not fun. And it was good. And then I remember getting off the ship and they'd snow cleared a path through the snow, and the snow was about half a meter above my head, walking through this little channel up to station. It was incredible. It was, Now, if I look at the station now, it's not intimidating. It's actually the opposite. I feel like I'm too comfortable here. But back then, I was definitely intimidated by the scale we operate, the machinery, the masts, the antennas, everything.
Yeah, when I walked off the ship, it was overwhelming, and it's a big place, and you just think, I'm living here for the next 16 to 18 months of my life, and it's going to be something.
And then, I think I've been anticipating that moment of walking down the gangplank off the JCR for so long, like so many months, that it was kind of just a bit bizarre when it was actually just happening, and it was just a normal occurrence. So I think maybe it's more moments to do with aircraft where you just land somewhere, or what is your job is such a surreal kind of bizarre kind of normality that's become a normality, and that's kind of cool.
As far as BAS is concerned, it's the largest of the 5 stations that they operate within the Antarctic, and it's one of currently 3 overwintering stations. What we do here is, it's interesting, I didn't appreciate until I first came to Rothera how much of a sort of logistics hub it is. We obviously do science on station, so we've got the Bonner Lab, we've got that, and that operates all year round, but then in summer we have 20 to 25 transiting aircraft come through, and they largely belong to the foreign operators, so the American National Programme, the Australian Antarctic Division, and so on, and various other operators, and also some private ones as well who do some tourism ones. Essentially any aircraft, any Twin Otter or Basler aircraft has to come through Rothera because it doesn't have the range to fly from New Zealand, Australia, or Cape Town. It basically has to fly from South America and then hop through Rothera and refuel on its way through here. So it's a big kind of logistics hub, and actually we are quite a big staging post for several national operators, but also we have our own aircraft as well. So we've got 4 Twin Otters and a Dash 7, which the Dash 7 largely does the transiting, bringing people on and off station from South America and the Falkland Islands. The UK to sort of claim, and it gets quite interesting with the Antarctic Treaty because all territorial claims are put to one side. However, just about all the nations who do claim a part of the Antarctic do a couple of little things just to keep their hand in there, I guess. So, Rothera is the capital of the British Antarctic Territory. It's the largest station within that territory. And one of the things to sort of maintain that sovereignty, if you like, as well as flying the flag and having a post office, is also having a magistrate. And so part of the role, comically, I think, for me, given that I don't have a degree and know absolutely nothing about law, generally speaking, is I'm sworn in before I deploy south as magistrate for the British Antarctic Territory, which I did the maths on this at some point, and I think the British Antarctic Territory is about 8 times the size of the UK, so I'm probably magistrate for one of the largest areas on the planet, which is quite amusing. But the chances of me doing anything with those sort of magisterial powers is actually very slim. I only know of them being used once, and that was to marry a couple who wintered here back in 2017.
Research in Antarctica is incredibly important because it's the main reason why we're here. So according to the Antarctic Treaty, we can only really be in Antarctica to conduct peaceful research, to understand the continent, to understand the influence of activities in the rest of the world on this continent and the feedback mechanisms that then impact the rest of the world. The long-term goal of
conducting marine research is to build a better picture of what is happening in Antarctic ecosystems. They're such unique habitats that, compared to other areas of the world, are very, very understudied.
Because we've only really started doing good, thorough research in Antarctica in the second half of the last century, well, technology just wasn't good enough back then, and it wasn't as logistically possible to be conducting long-term research here, because we only started having research stations in the 20th century, and we've only started overwintering people at that time as well. So we couldn't establish as thorough research for as long a time as it is in other places. So, for example, in the UK, research on plankton or research on marine animals has been going back hundreds and hundreds of years because it's so accessible. Whereas the Antarctic, or the area that we're studying here, hasn't been that accessible until the second half of the 20th century. So we're only really starting to fully understand the very basics about life in Antarctica, really. The Bonner Laboratory is the main research facility at Rothera. It consists of about 10 different lab spaces. We have a diving facility, we've got a marine aquarium, and we are connected to the boat shed, which houses a fleet of ribs that we use to do marine science. We can pretty much support anything from terrestrial to marine science, oceanography, biochemistry, and a wide range of different research projects have been conducted here at the lab.
Welcome to the Bonner Lab. This is our entrance to the outside world, where we have the boat shed and we pack the boat with all the dive gear. So if I take you through to the scuba diving facility, here we have the area where we wash all our kits down, where we prepare our kits, a lovely bath in case we get hypothermic. We have the changing rooms with all our dry suits and boat suits and masks. And then moving through the dive stall, we have the recompression chamber. And then when we've collected our animals from the dive, we can put them into our flow through aquarium, which is here. So this tank's in the process of being cleaned out. We have a variety of algae to urchins to deep tanks if we've got some more experimental structures that need a long time to be processed and need a big depth of water. Here we've got all of our tanks with water that is received from the environment from Honey Bucket just outside, and keeping the organisms at an ambient temperature. We've got lots of different tanks, benches to do experimental work. So here we go. And then we have an experimental room where we can run further experiments and control light and temperature. Then we have the Roth Laboratory. So here we are making concrete blocks at the moment to measure iceberg impact. This is where we do everything that can be messy. We've got a seawater hose and a freshwater hose, some sinks, and it's a really good space to be able to process samples after a dive. We also keep the Niskin bottles here from the CTD sampling events. So yeah, these are the Niskin bottles. And we've got a really nice outside view, and this I will open the door for because I'm going to regret doing this. This is our beautiful, beautiful view, which is so motivating being here. The only problem is when the snow builds up. And then this is my favourite room. This is the bio store. And this is where we keep all of our equipment. So from the correct PPE to sampling vials to microbiology equipment and scales. And I really like the way that these cupboards open. It feels like you're in a library, although it's equipment. And then, yeah, project-specific kit. We've got loads of aquarium maintenance here. Air stones and air lines, pumps, pipes, sampling nets, sieves. So I've got a whole array of beakers. So we've got the Andrew Clark Library. This is a mess. One sec. And this is where we often have our boat meetings and boat meetings in the winter. Got an array of books on different subjects. So it's quite a nice space to be able to discuss ideas and talk about our plans for the day. Some old PhD theses, research that's conducted on station, and specifically from the Bonner laboratory. We've got the marine biologist office, which is the biggest office on station, and it's actually a really nice place to work in, so quite lucky for that. A really motivating space to work because the views are so incredible, so I managed to get lots done. Got some really nice camera equipment here, underwater cameras and just normal photography. And then we have the controlled environment facility. So this is where we have the liquid nitrogen to fix samples. We have a -80 freezer here, and we have a -20 freezer. There's a door to the outside as well, so all samples that will then be sent onto the ship can easily be transported. Then we have the molecular and the microbiology laboratory. So this is the molecular laboratory, and this is used for specific experiments, mostly in the summer, to DNA extraction and amplification. Got lots of pipettes and fridge space and furnaces. And this is the microbiology laboratory in similar vein. And then we have the analytical laboratory, where all the water sampling is done from the CTD event. So this is the Marine Assistance Home. So they use these stacks and they filter all the waters with different filter sizes and then extract chlorophyll. So this, it's the analytical laboratory. Lots of chemicals stored here and fume hoods as well, so we can work with chemicals. This is the balance room, where we do our weighing and also the storage of chemicals. And then we have the furnace room, where we have ovens that go up to 1,000 degrees, and then, furnaces, and then we've got ovens. So we can get dry weight and ash weights from various samples. Then the dry laboratory. So currently, this is also another workshop space, but this is where everything is dry, as the name says. So we don't bring all our wet samples into here, but we could prepare structures that we want to install underwater, for example. This is an ROV, so remote operated vehicle, that is currently being used for a project looking at the impact that the wharf has had around Rothera. And then we have some terrestrial equipment here that again is used in the summer for moss and for terrestrial samples. And then we have the microscope room, and this is a really lovely place where we can identify samples with identification guides, and we've got quite a range of different microscopes that are fitted with cameras. For example, this one, and then we can connect the camera to the computer and we can see what we're looking at. So it's a really, really good place to analyse samples because the view is so good, and that's the most important thing. And then I'll take you we started from the south end of the Bonner laboratory, and now we're at the north end. And the final room is the radioisotope laboratory, which does not get used very much at the moment. It's used for sample storage. But yeah, this is the final laboratory of the Bonner.
There's a very strong tradition of marine biology here. So we service the science, we facilitate the diving, and the marine biologist has a number of projects that he or she will carry on.
Marine biologist is somebody who tries to understand the underwater environment and what is happening in the underwater environment. So we're really concerned with processes that are happening on the seafloor. We want to understand different organisms and different species and how they grow and respond and adapt to change.
We're trying to better understand how can these animals survive in these cold conditions and how are they protecting themselves against freezing. We're trying to understand how are they going to respond to warming. We're trying to understand how are they going to respond to other changes, such as changes in ocean acidity, for example, due to increased CO2 levels. We're trying to understand how changes to single animal species will affect the whole ecosystem. We're trying to understand how the melt of glaciers due to climate change will affect the seafloor community, because melting glaciers will lead to more icebergs calving off, which will lead to more icebergs impacting the seafloor and potentially destroying the community. So what kind of effect does that have? We're trying to understand how changes in the climate worldwide will affect the Antarctic, which will have a direct effect on the water masses that are being produced here, which will then have an indirect effect on the oceans worldwide. And a lot of the things that we're trying to understand are actually quite relevant to Europe and to people elsewhere. So it's not really that we're just researching a random strange little sea louse that lives on the Antarctic seafloor and that no one else should care about. We are doing something in a totally different place in the world that might potentially have a massive effect on an entire ecosystem here, and we should understand the effects and we should do everything we can to protect this ecosystem because it's unique and it's our behavior and our choices potentially lead to the destruction of this entire ecosystem, and that needs saving. Because there are certain adaptations, there are certain special traits of life that we don't get anywhere else. And it's incredibly important that we preserve this because it's an ecosystem that we might never get back once it's lost.
So we study these processes in situ, in their environment, using diving as a tool to access these underwater habitats.
So the diving we do down here is scientific diving. So our divers just now are marine biologists. So they've obviously went to university studying marine biology. For myself, being the field diving officer, it could be any sort of diver, primarily someone in a science background, but myself, I'm from a construction background. But any sort of commercial diver can come down here.
Diving in Antarctica is a lot harder than it is back north. With the weather and all the little things that you don't have to consider back home, such as clearing the boat shed of snow in the morning to get the boat out. These little things add up to a much longer day. The water is cold. Above the water is even colder, so the guys that are on the boat, the supervisors, the tenders, the boat drivers, they actually suffer a lot harder than we do when we're in the water.
Yeah, diving in Antarctica is absolutely amazing. It's such a cool place and it's a dream for many people because it's so rare that you can take this polar plunge and actually get to experience these habitats that are so vibrant and so dictated by seasonal change more than ever compared to any other ecosystem. They really respond to the strong cues of light. In the summer, we've got 24 hours of daylight, which drives the most intense phytoplankton blooms. But there's an enormous input of productivity, which just drives these ecosystems to flourish and for animals to grow to enormous sizes and to grow really quickly. And then on the other hand, you then have the winter and there is almost no light except some twilight. And you also got sea ice that is blocking out anything. So lots of the underwater seaweed forests start to die back. And a lot of the invertebrate animals start hiding under rocks and go into a dormancy and they slow down their metabolism. And to experience that and to go underwater and see this change happening over the year is very, very unique. And to have a job that allows you to do that is extremely rewarding. The diving is logistically challenging and getting out on the water is not always easy because we have many constraints such as the weather and such as predators and also machinery that basically allows us to enact marine operations. But once you're in the water, it is so rewarding, but it's cold. The water temperature is pretty stable here compared to other biomes. So the range of temperature is -1.8 to +2 degrees. So winter and summer temperatures.
At 25 meters, they're going to spend around about 25 minutes. They tend to not be able to manage more than around about 40-45 minutes because it's just too cold. The core temperature of the diver is generally pretty good, but their extremities start to get cold and it can become quite painful. So that the lengthiest dive they've had is around about 40-45 minutes.
To combat this cold water, it's not like when I've just been diving in the tropics and I can wear a really thin wetsuit or not even that and just roll off the back of a boat. Here we are fully equipped, so we have thermal layers under our dry suit, so the thermal layers are quite thick. Resembles a bit like a sleeping bag, and we wear our dry suit over the top. So our dry suit is completely enclosed unit with a zip at the back, so your diving partner has to close the zip for you. The seals and your feet are completely covered, and then over the top we wear 7mm neoprene gloves and a 7mm neoprene hood, and we wear a full face mask, so this is delivering us oxygen on demand. Over the top of the dry suit we wear what's called a BCD, a buoyancy control device, which contains a main cylinder for diving that delivers the primary air source, and then a bailout cylinder that delivers a backup in case there's an issue. So all this is connected to us when we enter the water, so we've got a mask that is snug and fitted to our face and actually keeps us quite warm. And then we have other accessories such as a dive computer, a compass for navigation, a knife in case we get entangled in anything or we need to cut ourselves loose or cut something, and then a torch, because in the winter we cannot see anything almost, so we definitely need a torch to light the way.
There's lots of safety concerns that we have to consider down here. The main one that we consider is marine predators. We have orca and we have leopard seals that frequently use the bay and the waters surrounding Rothera. So we have to be very precarious as to when we dive, and we have to maintain a vigilant lookout when we are diving.
And we have what's called a mammal watch. Half an hour before we dive, we'll look for predators around the area where we're going to dive. If we see any or any are spotted, we then don't dive for 4 hours, and then we'll continue that half an hour watch again. If we see the same animal or a different one, we then won't dive again. So it will continue rolling for 4 hours. So 2 in a day means that we wouldn't actually dive in that day.
So once we're underwater, we conduct a variety of different tasks. Sometimes we collect species for monthly long-term analyses to look at different life history traits. So we would go down and we would look for specific species such as starfish or brittle stars or sea cucumbers and anemones, and we drop down on a site that is generally quite well known. We communicate our depth, and then we go for a search and we look for the species that we're looking for, and we collect them into a catch bag, and then these are brought up to the surface and kept in water until we get to the aquarium. Another aspect, and this is more my side of the work, is experimental setups. What I'm doing at the moment is understanding the rate of breakdown of different seaweed species. So I've set up a system, an enclosed system, where I can keep different seaweeds and monitor their breakdown over time. So then to set this up, different systems such as chains and baskets are put down onto the seabed and secured, lowered down from the boat with a rope and in a basket. So as divers, we then collect the work that is dropped to us at the bottom of the seabed and then lay it out, set it up accordingly. We also take sediment samples as part of the project to understand the breakdown of this seaweed and how the carbon is transferred into the sediment. So we have little sediment pots whereby we can collect sediment for further analyses. And that's quite a difficult job because you've got lots of things and everything floats and becomes buoyant. So you've got these mitts as well. You resemble a bit like a crab because your hands are basically put together like this. So the 3 fingers are keeping warm, and everything you have to do is you have to have quite a lot of dexterity. So even opening a little cap, take some sediment sample is challenging. And surveys, regular surveys to see when animals are feeding. So we'll swim in straight lines along a certain defined area of the seabed and then record at regular intervals what we're seeing.
So from the boat, we use what's called through water communications. So the divers have an earpiece and a mouthpiece, and there's a radio signal which travels through the water via a transducer, and they can talk to me and I can talk to them. Sometimes not particularly reliably though. So they need to report where they are, what they're doing, and the depth that they're at.
So on our mask, we have a button. So we push that button when we want to communicate our air pressures and our depth profile, and if we are going to make a change to the dive plan.
Nadia, topside.
Can I topside?
Yes, hello Nadia. Can I get your max depth, please?
23 metres, max depth.
Yeah, roger that, 23. And could you wind your SMB in, please?
Was that wind of the SMB?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, cool. Nadia, can I get an air check off you, please?
0, 1, 7, 0.
Roger that, 80170.
Ryan.
And Ryan, air check please. Ryan, top tight. Yeah, air check please, air check. Yeah, roger that, 90170. And just so you know, you have 4 minutes remaining. 4 minutes remaining.
Because we are so isolated here, it's essential that we have a hyperbaric chamber. So if there is a diver-related injury and they need to be recompressed, we'll put them into our dive chamber, which is on station here. Okay, so this is our recompression chamber or decompression chamber here at Rothera. The reason it's here is because of our diving operations, and we need to be within 6 hours of a chamber for the type of diving that we do. If there's a dive-related injury, the most common form of injury, DCI, decompression illness, and that would be an on-loading of nitrogen. It means that we breathe compressed air and we build up nitrogen on our bodies, in our bodies, and our bodies can then saturate in nitrogen, and we then have to off-gas that. The way we do that is over a period of time, but what we need to do is go into the recompression chamber, and it shrinks the size of those bubbles, and it stops them from travelling around your body and causing problems. So the chamber itself is a 2-compartment chamber. We've got an entry lock and a main lock. We just flicker the lights on, please, Jack. Yep. So entry lock and main lock. In the main lock there you can see we've got 2 beds and some bedding, and that's where the patient would go in. We can transfer people under pressure in the entry lock as well. Down here we have a porthole which we can look into the chamber itself, and we've got a medilock here which is used to pass smaller pieces of equipment such as medicine or food into the chamber. This is the most vulnerable part of the chamber because whilst this is under pressure, this is closed, all of that pressure is trying to push that door open, which is why it's machined quite heavily and it's quite thick there. So this is the most vulnerable part of the chamber. We've got a telephone here, which is used to talk to the people in the chamber for a private conversation, maybe between a doctor out here and a technician inside, not necessarily the patient. They've got an electrical panel here which has all our lights and our air scrubbers and heating and that sort of stuff on there. We've got depth gauge here and our electrical sensor readings here. We're looking for O2 buildup and CO2 buildup. Both of those are quite dangerous. We've got our comms panel, which is used to talk to people. As an open mic comms, we can hear and speak to them at all times. Here we've got our air supply and O2 supply, and this is our depth gauge for our entry lock. Moving down here, we've got our filling gauges, filling valves here for the entry lock and main lock, and we've got our vents for our entry lock and main lock. Down here, we've got our cylinders, and that's full of air. That's all we use is air, and that is what we use to pump into the chamber to pressurise it. You'll see a pressure change. You'll definitely feel it in your ears. So anytime if you can't equalise your ears and your ears start to hurt too much, just say, and we will stop and we'll bring the chamber up slightly to help your ears. It will feel hot going down, and it will feel cold coming up. Okay. Also in there's a balloon which is pumped up. It's about that big, and you should see it half in size. Yeah. So it's a visual representation, and there's also a backpack bag with a quilt in there, and you'll see that squished down as well. Good. All right. Yeah. Cool. Ready to do this? Yeah. Leg first. Leg first. Yeah.
Yeah. 30 seconds. 2. See you later, Marek. There you go. Please confirm the door is locked.
Yeah, door shut, locked.
And the medical lock as well.
And the medical lock.
Close the lock.
Roger that. Ready to leave surface in 15 seconds. Leaving surface.
Quicker. Much quicker.
At bottom.
Yeah, perfect.
Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hello, Marky Mark.
Do you feel like you're getting ready for what Hallie's going to be like, the little bubble?
I hadn't quite considered that, but maybe there's some similarities.
Get used to staring at that white wall.
5 seconds till leaving bottom.
Yeah, still good. I reckon we're closer to 50. Yeah, it's got a limiter on it, I think.
So that's designed that you can't come up too quick.
But the tables are 80 metres a minute, so it feels really quick.
So you can't.
Okay, guys, you be on the surface, try the door.
Did you feel cold and warm?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So we make sure that's in a state of readiness before we do any diving.
We have a room that is kept at a cold temperature and receives water just from outside. So if we want to take animals out of their environment and run particular experiments, such as looking at the effect of temperature, salinity, different stresses that we want to test, or even just understand their aspects of their biology, look at when they're reproducing, what they're doing, measure their metabolism, we can keep these in flow through tanks that have constant water pumping through them. So I spend quite a lot of my time in the aquarium maintaining the species and then conducting different works on them. And it's really nice because it's an engagement tool where people on station can, because only the divers are able to go under the water, people can come and see these weird and wonderful creatures that are colourful and different, and it's really nice to have interest and explain to people about what they're looking at and what animal is this related to and how does it function and how does it feed.
We support different long-term studies here, and one of the most important ones is the Rothera Time Series. The Rothera Time Series is an oceanographical project, which means it deals with the properties of the ocean rather than the biology. So it's not really all that focused on life forms, it's more focused on the chemistry and the physics of the water. The marine assistant, which is one of our in-house scientists who spends an entire winter working here at Rothera, they go out twice a week on one of our little boats, and they go to a very specific spot in Ryder Bay, which is the area of sea around Rothera. The water there is about 500 meters deep, and they lower down a sensor that's called a CTD.
And this probe, we descend down to 500 meters. As it's descending, it records every 2 seconds, and it records conductivity, temperature, depth. It also records chlorophyll content, which is taken with a fluorometer, and it has a PAR sensor, which looks at the light intensity of the watercolor.
They then winch the whole thing back up, which takes a bit of time. And once they're finished with that, they then sample the water at different places. So they can later analyze this in the lab, and it can tell them something about the organisms that live in the water. So the algae. Algae are really important because they're the basis of the food web. So they're the only organisms that can use sunlight and carbon dioxide and create biomass, which is really important because that then supports little other organisms such as krill, for example. And krill obviously is then very important for whales and seals and all the higher life forms that we get here.
After we collect the water samples on the boat, we then secure the water and we bring it back into the laboratory. And back here in the lab, we use a filter system to filter the water through various filter sizes. So we use a stack of containers with different filters in between, and the water can drain through the filters, and these filters collect the microorganisms. So once the water has filtered through, we then fix these microorganisms onto the filter using liquid nitrogen, and then they're frozen in -80 degrees before they can get sent back to the UK for analysis.
So they look at these different things, and they also study how the properties of the water change, so whether different water masses are coming in, whether there's warming over time or not. And this is obviously really important on a global scale because in Antarctica, a lot of the really important water masses are being produced. So because it's so cold here, water freezes, and when it freezes, it takes away basically the fresh part of the water, and it leaves really heavy and highly salty water, and that sinks down, and it's really, really cold, and it forms what's called Antarctic bottom water, which then circulates all over the world and is really important for distribution of nutrients and oxygen around the oceans. what happens here and the dynamics and changes in the water masses here are really important for the rest of the world. That's why this time series, for example, is incredibly important. It's been going on since 1997, and it's unique because we do sampling every week, all through the winter, and we're getting this incredibly high temporal resolution data set, which is not something that you get in a lot of other places in the Antarctic.
The boats we use are pretty similar to boats back home. We use ribs, which are rigid hull inflatable boats. So we have 2 Humber ribs, which are 6.5 metres. They're kind of a little bit smaller than the other one, a bit tougher. They're quite good for breaking ice, which we end up doing quite a lot of. But yeah, they're really just, a standard twin-engined rib. We also have a slightly bigger rib, a 7.5 metre island rib, which is, again, a lovely boat. It would be our primary dive boat, but at the moment we've got that in storage because the conditions aren't so suited to it. We obviously carry some extra kit. We carry ice axes, ice screws. We carry a bog chisel, which is very useful. It's like a boat hook, but it has a chisel on the end. It's useful for pushing ice out of the way. We obviously carry a satellite phone. We carry a spare GPS. We carry extra clothes, some extra bits of food and stuff like that. It wouldn't be unthinkable that we could end up stuck on an island and having to stay there for weeks if suddenly a lot of ice came in.
The weather here, it's been a really interesting winter. It's been really warm and it's been really windy. That's had a big impact on things like our sea ice. So at the moment, temperatures are around about -2 degrees Celsius. Now, considering it's July in Antarctica, that's really very, very warm, but it changes so much. Last week, -20 degrees Celsius, -2 degrees now, but it's the winds that have been the real killer for us. We had a really very windy May, around about 20 days where the winds reached about gale force, and that brought a lot of warm and snowy weather as well. So walking around the station at the moment, lots of snow, and it's just, I think, can be a pretty windy one. The sea ice we've had last week has broken up, so we've been able to get boats out as well. So open water in July. It's definitely been an interesting winter so far. So we are quite far north for the Antarctic. We're around about 67 degrees south. So we're just in the Antarctic Circle. So by no stretch of the imagination are we the coldest part of Antarctica. But in the winter, we'll still get down to temperatures around about -20 quite frequently, and even as low as about -30 degrees Celsius. So it is cold, and I think with a bit of wind in there as well, it makes it even colder, a bit of that wind chill too. But in the summertime, the snow around most of the station does melt. It gets to be more of a grey kind of quarry kind of look, and we start to see temperatures back up regularly above freezing, so normally around about 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. But it's not unusual to see temperatures up around about 8 or even 9 degrees Celsius in the height of summer, and that 24-hour daylight as well. So it can be a real difference from here in the summer and the winter, but definitely a windy, cold day makes you really, really appreciate being there in Antarctica. So as we go further in towards the continent, we find it's generally a lot drier. So we're right on the coast, so we get plenty of snow coming across us as well. And we also find those temperatures start to go down as well, particularly as you head into a place like Sky Blue. That's a blue ice runway down on the far base of the peninsula, scoured by really strong winds. Temperatures there quickly down to about -20 degrees Celsius in the summer. And even in the winter, I think we're down to about -40, -50 degrees Celsius. Across towards Halley, the other side of the Ronnie, you're looking temperatures there are again around about -40, -50 degrees Celsius.
Rothera, we have amazing internet. The VSAT is amazing. We have HF comms. We have 4 HF towers to communicate with field parties, with airplanes, and with other stations. We talked to South Pole Station yesterday, actually, which is fantastic.
Radio, this is South Pole on 13251. I copy you loud and clear here. How copy?
South Pole Readability 5, good evening. How are you guys?
We also have Iridiums, so sat phones, and Iridium Goes, which are sat teletext devices. We have aerial VHF, which is to communicate with planes, and marine VHF, which we use as normal handheld radios to talk to people on the station. It's so important because this place is incredibly dangerous. You can go quite a few hours without seeing anybody. If I'm walking up at the optical hut, which is over the hill, so there's no stray light from the station to interfere with the optical experiments, and I can't communicate with someone and I hurt myself if I break my leg, that is potentially dangerous. I could die if I fall over in the snow and I can't move. So it's so important that we have this marine VHF. It's sort of a lifeline. And apart from that, it's also really handy to not have to search for someone. You can just radio them and see where they are. One of the most important things for landing planes is having good comms, and I will be in the tower doing operations during the first few flights when the summer comes and we're transitioning from winter to summer. There is an antenna called the Step IR antenna, which has these dipoles which can retract and extend, and by doing this you can match the frequency to the antenna length. So effectively you can go from 3 megahertz up to 100 megahertz really accurately with really good fidelity. This antenna also rotates, but the issue is it's high-tech and amazing, but quite flimsy. It's made of carbon fiber. So at the beginning of winter, we took it down, stuck it up in the hangar, and now that we're coming towards the end of winter, I'm now working on recommissioning it. So we've brought it down, we've got it next to the tower, and we now have to put it on top of the tower, reconnect the motor drivers, the HF connection, and try and get it running again so we can actually land some planes at Rothera.
What did you do different? That's amazing.
No, still not enough. Whoa, better rotate, better rotate, better rotate, better rotate, better rotate. What a legend. What a fucking legend. Hey, we put this Step IR antenna up. It's only taken us a week to try and get good weather. Wait for the garage to clear out the hang of all the other equipment. Oh, we're lowering. Ha. Right, that's good, Pete. Okay, time to do some sketchy shit. Right, so all these hooks. Time to stand up. Reflections of the ice cliffs in the water, amazing. Pete, thank you so much for all your help. Sorry it took so long. There was a bolt that is stunning. That is really pretty. Yeah, just gonna look at connect cables and connectors and see what I need to bring to repair the corroded stuff. I don't think we could have picked a better day to do this, to be honest. Fucking stunning outside. Right, UHF.
How much longer have you got?
5 minutes.
Oh, cool.
Just gonna check these connectors and then what? Can you see that?
Yeah, look at this shit.
Does look a bit shit. We have two other HF antennas, same as Step IR, but less accurate, without as good fidelity. That's the north-south antenna and the east-west antenna. And by having them perpendicular, we can make sure that there's always a large component of radio waves coming towards us to be received by these antennas, and so we can talk to any plane in any sort of area around the world that's coming towards Rothera. Problem is, they're quite old, and they're really simple bits of kit. They're just bits of wire going from two ceramic insulators to ceramic insulator in the middle, and then down to the actual feeder cable. But the crimps break in the high winds. We've reached 70 knots this winter, and these are something that we can't bring down and store. They're up all the time. So twice now we've had to climb the masts, bring the antenna down, recrimp them, put them back up, and hopefully they'll survive until the end of summer. We've done a good job of making sure those crimps are extra strong. We have lots of experiments at Rothera. We have optical experiments. So for example, we have the all-sky camera, which is taking photos of the sky every 4 minutes throughout the year. This will be used to look at gravity waves and polar stratospheric clouds and lots of other interesting phenomena with that.
We've got an ozone instrument in there measuring sort of stratospheric ozone. And then there's another array of 5 instruments in there that are looking at clouds in the atmosphere, because these are not very well modelled. They've also got lots of instruments looking at gravity waves and the way that propel energy up through the atmosphere.
Apart from that, we have 2 radars. We have an MF radar and a SkyMet radar. Both are tracking meteorites, but the SkyMet is tracking how many meteorites are hitting the Earth at any one time. And the MF radar is looking at their Doppler shift. And if you know their Doppler shift, you can then figure out how the winds are moving in the really high atmosphere.
And also because of this sort of decay of the signal, you can work out temperatures up in the higher atmosphere as well. Because our balloons, although we release balloons up into the atmosphere, they don't go that high. And any kind of rocket observations just go too fast. So these arrays of radars help us work out winds in the upper atmosphere.
We have a VLF lab, which is looking at lightning strikes from around the world. And there's VLF labs in pretty much every Antarctic station and all over the world. And all this data goes to one central experiment, which they can then pinpoint where each lightning strike happens. They can map storms, they can see how they're progressing, how they're moving, and their intensity.
This is the PALM, or the Sky Radiometer. It just looks like a little bit of a anti-aircraft gun. It raises its head and finds the sun in the sky and tracks the sun. And that's measuring how much of the sunlight is scattered by particles in the atmosphere by that scattering, you can work out the density and size of those particles in the atmosphere, such as dust or salt or volcanic ash. And that's important because we want to know how much of that is in the atmosphere so that we can work out how much sunlight has been scattered and therefore how much sunlight is getting to the surface of the Earth and how much of it is being trapped. And so that leads on to the Earth's radiation balance with the sun and also leads on to radiation balance and climate change.
I installed Doris at the beginning of summer, so this is an instrument which is pinging up our GPS location in 2 frequencies at 2 gigahertz and 400 megahertz up to a satellite. And there's a couple of stations around the world, and what they're doing is they're geo-referencing that point to the GPS network. So they're effectively keeping the GPS network millimeter accurate. So this is integral to our GPS and GLONASS networks.
This year we've had a team going out to the King George VI Sound, and they are called the Lakes team, and they're looking at surface meltwater pools that are developed on the ice shelf in the summer months, and then taking lots of weather measurements and GPS measurements on the ice shelf to try and work out whether the meltwater pools are affecting the stability of this ice shelf and whether that can be translated to other ice shelves around Antarctica.
My main job as a meteorologist, particularly during the winter, is to make sure the long-term record continues. So that means I look after the whole suite of Met instruments, the thermometers, the barometers, the Met tower, but I also keep measurements of things like cloud kite types and coverage. So think about weather observations around the world. You normally find them where people are. It's so much easier to do an observation with a person. Now, as technology has got more and more advanced, we've had automatic weather stations, so we've found them spread across the world. The observations in Antarctica are still pretty sparse. So every observation we can get from here is a really important factor. And the more data you have, the better we can build a picture of what's happening right now. And that's the best starting point for any weather model. So getting a nice idea of what's happening right now means we can then project into the future. So it's really useful for short-term things, so for things like weather forecasting, which our pilots use and are used in weather forecasts across the globe, but also for keeping that climate record as well. So making sure those weather observations from the Antarctic are here is a really important thing to make sure we know how the world is changing and how we expect things to change in the future. On the station, we have a mixture of automatic weather stations, AWSs, and manual observations. So things like temperature and pressure and wind speed, all measured by instruments that we have around the station. But there are things that we still need a bit of a human observation for, us. That's what my role is. And while we're here at Rothera, we've got power and everything supplied quite nicely. But if we've got observations from further out in the field, we have these automatic weather stations, these AWSs, which are remote sites which have everything you need and are powered by solar panels in the summer and then batteries as we go through the winter time, the dark winter here. So we've got 5 of these sites across different parts of the peninsula. And in the summer, one of my jobs is to head out to these sites and to make sure everything's still working. And it often involves a fair bit of digging. You can imagine that over winter, we get a fair bit of snow, which buries the batteries. So every year we raise all the instruments up above the snow level, and we make sure everything's working nice and well. So the data we collect here at Rothera is shared with the UK Met Office. So the information we get here is sent via Synops, a special type of weather code, right up to the team back up in Exeter in the UK. And then from there, it's disseminated around the world. So it's used not just by the UK Met Office, but for Met Offices around the world to make sure their weather models are working well, and by researchers as well to make sure that their weather models and their climate models for the future are also in tune. So the weather observations we keep on the surface are pretty standard, things you'd find when you look at the weather back home, your temperature, your winds, and those kind of things. And that's a really good way of finding out what's happening with the weather in a very 2D sense of the word, so a nice weather map. But what we also want to know is what's happening vertically up through the atmosphere. So we use weather balloons, and these are giant balloons of helium that as they ascend, a little device beneath them just sends back information, so things like temperature and humidity. And by using the GPS in it as well, we can work out wind speed and direction at different levels in the atmosphere. So that gives us an idea of what's happening vertically, as well as what's happening spatially and horizontally around the globe as well. And that information is really useful. And as we go into the future, we're going to use those radiosondes as well to help to ground truth the satellite data as well. So by using the radiosondes and the weather balloons, we can make sure the information we're getting from those guys is the same that we're getting from the balloons on the surface. My first job in the morning is to head across the runway to South Cove. That's where we have the balloon launching facility. So it's really a great big open space. It means that we can launch the balloons in pretty windy conditions as well without fear of it hitting anything. So that's our main step. So it's a bit of an early start for the Met team, particularly in the wintertime when it's dark and cold and snowy. And you head across the runway and you open up your radio sound. Now, these are special devices which contain all your instruments. So they're very, very small, about 150 grams or so. So they have to be quite small for the weather balloon just to lift up and take it away. So we take these and we make sure they're working by running them through a ground check unit. And we head across to the site we fill the balloons. Now, down here we use helium to fill the balloons up. So they're nice and buoyant, and we fill them just to the right level. If they're too full, the balloon will rise too quickly. Now, it won't give us enough measurements, and if you don't put enough helium in them, the balloon won't rise. So we keep enough in there just to make it rise just at the right speed. And once the balloon is full, we've gone through our ground check with our radio sonde as well. We attach it to the bottom, and then we let it go. And as it goes up into the sky, it sends back data through radio waves, and an antenna on the roof picks all that information up. And once we've got the information, it comes through, it's all put into a different code, and it's sent right up to the UK Met Office. And then they can send that around the world and use it for all their global models as well. So down here at the ends of the globe, it's quite hard sometimes to find satellite data from geostationary satellites. These are based around the equator and give a really good view across the globe there. But down at the far edge of their reach, down towards us here at the poles, it's quite hard to get good satellite images. So we use polar or orbiting satellites. Now, these are more infrequent. They come through every couple of hours or so, but a bit lower to the ground, and they give some amazing resolution. So here at Rothera, we've got a radome up on the point, which is directly communicating with the satellites. And so as the satellites pass overhead, they send back down that data, which is excellent for us, particularly for our forecasters in the summer to try and work out where the cloud is and how they can get the planes out and about. But also in the winter, the use of things like trying to find out where the sea ice is. And all that data gets sent back to us here at Rothera. We use it locally, but also gets passed on to researchers out in, say, places like the University of Wisconsin, which also use that data as well.